I am pure evil. Written, produced, and narrated by Winslow Swan. Jacob Talbot sat in the easy chair opposite Dr. William Radcliffe. He was relaxed and quite comfortable, even though his hands were shackled, and he wore the jumpsuit that the jail had given him when he was booked into the establishment. His long legs were folded, and he sat placidly listening to the disclaimer that the doctor had probably read through hundreds of times with others in the same situation. This was not the same situation that anyone could have possibly found themselves in, Jacob thought to himself. A brief smile crossed his lips as he listened attentively to the good doctor. "Do you understand each of the rights that I have read to you?" the doctor asked. "It is all perfectly clear," Jacob answered in the clipped English accent. "You wish to make a statement and consent to the recording of this session?" "Absolutely," Jacob said. "As a matter of fact, I do believe that you should record my statement. No one is going to believe you." The doctor looked over his glasses at the tall and lanky figure of the man and thought back to the file that he had read before receiving his newest patient. Jacob Talbot looked nothing like the killer that the police had reported him to be. He was thin and wiry, with curly brown hair and the slight hint of a mustache under his bony nose. He looked more like someone that you would meet behind the desk of a bank or in an accounting office. "How should I begin?" Jacob asked. "I believe," Dr. Radcliffe told him, "that it is always best to start at the beginning, since we are recording this, and it may be possibly used in evidence against you. Why don't we start with your full name and address, your age, and any other particulars that you wish to include?" With a slight sigh, Jacob began. "My name is Jacob Andrew Talbot. Until last week I resided at 142 South Bend Road. I was born on May 20th, and this is my 32nd year on this planet. My parents are both deceased, and I have no other family. Until recently I was married to Julie Simmons, who now resides at Crestlawn Cemetery, where she was laid to rest. I suppose that does it for the preliminaries, don't you, Doctor? Do you wish to be called by your given name?" The doctor made a few quick notes and said, "You may call me William, or Bill if you prefer. I answer to both." "William it is," Jacob said, settling back in the leather easy chair. "Now, Mr. Talbot," the doctor began, "or would you prefer Jacob?" "Jacob will be fine." "All right, Jacob. Do you remember what happened last night before they brought you here?" the doctor asked. "I remember everything, William," Jacob said in a low, menacing voice. "You see, I am pure evil." "Why do you say that?" Bill asked. Jacob laughed slightly and said, "William, that is really no way to start this conversation. You should be asking me how I became pure evil." "Fine, Jacob," the doctor said, a little unnerved by the laughter. "We shall do this your way. How did you become pure evil?" Jacob thought for a moment before beginning his story. "I believe that it was last year," Jacob started. "Yes, it was at that time that I began to show tendencies toward becoming pure evil. As I suppose you already know, I was working as a cashier at a small but good-known company in the downtown district. We catered to the middle to lower class that simply needed a slight boost when things went awry. The largest loan that we made was only a few $1,000s, easy to pay back in the amount of time given. Our lowest loan was $500, used mostly by people who needed new tires for their car, a high-energy bill that came at a most inopportune time. I did my job very well, and after 2 years was promoted to branch manager. However, last year After only being on the job for a month, I began to get restless. I wasn't sleeping at nights. I was brooding about the smallest things and blowing up at my wife for the tiniest infractions. Even some of my employees had noticed the subtle change in my demeanor. One of my tellers was almost fired by me when they were only 10 cents short in their drawer. I remember the day when I first started to turn to evil. I've never been a smoker, thinking that it was a very nasty habit, but for some reason I began to take it up. I was outside, standing on the sidewalk and enjoying a menthol cigarette when a rather plump lady passed me and stopped to look at the display in the window in the shop next to our company. With her was a child of perhaps 2 or 3 years old. In his hand was a half-eaten chocolate bar, the other half covering the better part of his face. The little boy looked up at me as his mother, or perhaps aunt, began a conversation with another lady who had also walked by the window display. I puffed a cigarette one last time and stubbed it out into the sidewalk. The boy was still looking at me when, for no apparent reason, I reached down, snatched the bar of chocolate from his grubby little hand, and nearly swallowed it whole. The look of shock on that chocolate-smeared face brought absolute joy to my heart. I then simply turned and walked back into the loan company before I heard the wails of the child echoing down the street. The doctor made a few more notes and settled back into his own easy chair. "So how did that make you evil, Jacob?" the doctor said. "Oh, that did not make me evil, mind you," Jacob replied. "That incident was only the beginning. But don't you see? I had stolen candy from a baby. I had snatched the prize from his hand because I simply wanted to do it. I wanted the exact reaction from the little monster that I got, and I was elated. I went to my office and practically danced around the room." "I read the warrant, and this little minor incident doesn't add up to the atrocities." "You must let me finish," Jacob interrupted. "Please go on," the doctor said. "You see, William," Jacob began again, "I believe that there is a small amount of evil in every man, woman, and child. I believe that at some points in our life this little bit of evil grows and makes us do things that we would not ordinarily do. We are slaves to the society in which we live in. We are taught at a very early age that doing bad things will have consequences. In our young lives, those consequences could be anything from being grounded to a smack on the hand or the rear end. And most of this evil is minor, something that most would not give a second thought about. We ran the stop sign. We received $1 or $2 of too much change and didn't say anything, simply pocketed the money. Or we punched someone for a sly remark that had offended us. All of these things eventually have consequences, unless you embrace that feeling of triumph, as I did. After the candy incident, I decided that perhaps I should explore more of my evil side. It was getting close to the end of the day, and all the money that had been accepted by the 5 tellers was being brought to my office for counting. It was a Friday, payday for many, and there was quite a considerable sum of cash. You see, when you have a small loan, the payments are small, and most people will pay in cash. It took me almost an hour to count everything and get it ready for the deposit. My head teller was to take the sealed bag to the bank night deposit on the corner, and he waited just outside of my office. I looked at the stacks of hundreds, 50s, 20s, 10s, 5s, and 1s. All totaled, the deposit read $9,873. I thought back to the incident with the chocolate bar. If I was going to do anything, I would have to make it quick. I erased some figures in the books and jotted down some new numbers. Taking some loose paper from my desk, I stuffed the deposit bag and then proceeded to put the money into my large jacket. I replaced the books neatly for the auditors and handed the deposit bag to my very trusted head teller. I then casually locked up the establishment and went to my car. I never had the pleasure of seeing what happened the following Monday when all hell broke loose. I can only imagine the torrent of police detectives pouring over the books, trying to figure out what happened to the money. It was several weeks later that I found out from a local newspaper that the teller was arrested for grand larceny and theft. It seems the poor man had a somewhat large gambling problem, and the police assumed that the money had been given to some loan shark. I believe that the man is still in prison, having had not the best of attorneys." Jacob smiled again. "So," the doctor said, "you escalated from stealing candy to stealing money from your employer, and then framed someone for your crime. Well, that is quite an escalation in one day." "As I told you before, William, I am pure evil," Jacob said with a little satisfaction. "Didn't the police ask you any questions?" William asked. "Of course they did," Jacob explained. "I was the epitome of pure innocence. I'd put the money into the deposit bag, which was readily accessible to anyone who worked there. The teller must have switched the bags when I was getting my coat before locking up. The detectives were quite satisfied with my answers. I simply quit that very afternoon." "How did your wife feel about that?" the doctor asked. "About the theft? Or me quitting?" "It is obvious that you did not tell her about your ill-gotten gains, so yes, the fact that you had quit," the doctor told him. Jacob smiled again, and this time the doctor could see the hint of evil behind the pale blue eyes. It made him shudder a little. "She was absolutely livid," Jacob said excitedly. "She screamed and cursed and threw things around the house, as she had become evil herself." "I wouldn't call her reaction evil," the doctor commented. "No," Jacob said, his voice calming down. "No, I'll suppose that you wouldn't. You would say that she had a normal reaction. In any case, I simply told her where to go, packed a few belongings into an overnight bag, and left." "So you left your wife," the doctor said, making another note. "Well, not for good, as you very well know," Jacob said. "Why don't you continue?" the doctor said. "Yes, why don't I?" Jacob said with a sigh. "I drove to Las Vegas and managed to parlay my loot into a very handsome sum. I spent several months out there, playing cards, winning at almost every game that they had to offer. I dabbled in drug trading, buying marijuana first and then escalating to cocaine and heroin. I had a very good supplier, and almost an army of dealers, whom I treated very fairly. Oh, my evil knew no ends. We sold to anyone and everyone. School children, police, the government, all of them were hooked. There is nothing more satisfying than seeing a 9-year-old girl shooting poison into their arm. Of course, all good things come to an end. I took the several $1,000,000 in cash that I had, packed the car, made a quick phone call to the FBI and the Drug Task Force, turning in my compatriots, and disappeared into the sunset. Since I never used my real name, there was absolutely nothing to connect me with such heinous crimes. By perusing the papers and listening to the radio, I discovered that a drug sweep had been instigated, which led to the arrest of several well-known dealers and local officials. My soul was soaring at the mass destruction that I had caused. The doctor made a few more notes and said, "Somehow, with everything that you have told me, I feel that you were dissatisfied." Jacob, for the first time since being led from his jail cell to the hospital, and finally the office of Dr. William Radcliffe, frowned. "You are correct in your summation, William," Jacob said. "I was completely dissatisfied. Not with what I had done. Well, that had given me great pleasure. No, I was dissatisfied that no one except for me had an inkling of who I was. I could not take credit for the things that I had done, and that disturbed me. Tortured my nights when I sat restless in a myriad of hotel rooms scattered along the highway. I watched the news programs and saw others who had done evil things getting credit. I realized that if I were to simply walk into some random police station and confess all that I had done, no one would believe me. I left no stray clues for anyone to find that would point back to me. Now, this vexed me to the point of madness. I had to do something about it. Well, up until now, I had pretty much broken every law that my evil and twisted mind could think of. There was one thing that I had not perpetrated on any living being, and that was making by my own head said living being an unliving being. Murder had been rather distasteful to me before my evil grew. I could not even watch an act being committed on either a television show or a movie. And the sight of blood made me squeamish, and I had always felt the urge to regurgitate. However, sitting in a hotel just outside of this very city, not more than an hour from my own home, there sat the perfect victim for my next bit of evil. This time, however, everyone would know. I would make sure that the act was not only seen by as many people as possible, but that my name, Jacob Talbot, would be hailed as pure evil. The obvious question was exactly how to go about such a plan. I took some paper from the hotel room desk and began to jot down a few notes, a sort of blueprint for the murder of my darling wife. I imagined the joy in which she would express upon seeing me returning home to her loving arms. I toyed with the idea of a knife plunging into her heart. Perhaps I would purchase a gun. As she opened the door, I would fire once into her head. These, of course, were too quick and too easy methods of elimination. I would have to do something spectacular that would attract the media as well as the police. It took me days of thinking and planning before I came up with a solution to my problem. I smiled at the simplicity of it all, and then began to make my preparations. While still at the hotel, I made several phone calls to the various news agencies that are scattered around the city. I then went to the hardware store and purchased the necessary items to carry out my plan. Driving through the city streets, I watched people amble about their daily lives, unknowing that pure evil was among them. I toyed with the idea of suddenly driving up onto the sidewalk and taking out as many people as I could, but I refrained from such harsh behavior. Driving up to my home, I saw that her car was in the driveway. I boldly went up to the front door and rang the bell. She answered and fainted dead away. Well, this, of course, made my plan even easier. I simply lifted her up and laid her on the sofa. Retrieving some rope that I had bought earlier, I made sure that she was completely bound and unable to move. I then retrieved from the trunk of my car the 5 canisters of propane, 20 pounds each, and began to make the bomb that I had drawn up. It only takes a spark, you realize, and by setting a cell phone next to one of the containers and opening each just the tiniest bit, the fumes would soon fill the house. I then took another cell phone and dialed the number, not hitting the send button to activate my bomb, and then sat on the front porch and simply waited. It was a media circus, Jacob continued with a grin. I had opened the front room window curtain wide so that everyone could see inside. I was interviewed by the news media, who wanted to know why I was doing such a horrible thing. I warned that if anyone came close, or perhaps I was shot from a distance, my backup fuse would automatically be set off, and 10 seconds later there would be little pieces of my wife and house scattered everywhere. Do you see the evil that is now as pure as I can make it, William? Now everyone would know who I was and what I had done. The story doesn't end there, the doctor said, now smiling, which unnerved Jacob. No, Jacob answered and continued. Just before I pushed the button on the phone, sending my wife to oblivion, I pulled out a gun and began to kill as many people as I could. The explosion knocked everyone off of their feet, myself included. I was taken down by several officers. 34 people, including 10 police officers, were killed by either the explosion or the bullets from your gun, the doctor told him. Quite a record, I understand, Jacob said. And yet, the doctor said, loosening his tie and collar, that is really not pure evil. Jacob noticed that the room was growing warmer, and he felt sweat forming on his forehead. He began to fidget in the easy chair, the handcuffs and shackles seeming to tighten on his wrists and ankles. He tried to move into a different position, but nothing was helping. You see, Mr. Talbot, the doctor said, standing up and approaching the prisoner, evil can be found in everyone. Pure evil, as you so quaintly put it, is something that is only found in very few. Hitler, for example, was pure evil, and everyone knew what he was doing. It took an entire army and several nations to bring him to a semblance of justice. Are you feeling all right, Mr. Talbot? Seems to be getting warm in here, don't you think? Jacob asked as the sweat began to pour down his face. I am very comfortable, the doctor said, as he removed his coat and tie. Jacob thought he could see a patch of red skin under the white shirt that the doctor wore. There have been several killers, the doctor continued, who would fit the bill as pure evil. There are even those who killed absolutely no one, but convinced many to die for some such cause. Oh, the list goes on and on. However, you, Mr. Jacob Talbot, are simply a lower life form who is getting tired of his so-called life and wanted a little excitement. Now you have had your fun, so I think that it is time for me to have some fun. Don't you think? Jacob watched as the doctor lifted his index finger and a rather sharp and long fingernail began to extend from the digit. The doctor took the nail and began to scratch himself deeply down the middle of his face. Blood began to trickle from the wound and roll down the separated cheeks and onto the floor, making splashing sounds. What the hell? Jacob exclaimed. Exactly, Mr. Talbot, the doctor said, as his face began to peel away, revealing red and pulsating skin underneath. Horns began to grow from the temples, and the remaining clothes ripped away as the legs became hooves. A long and pointed tail slid its way out and began to whip around. Jacob looked around as the room began to transform itself from an office into a dungeon, complete with the faces of tortured souls embedded in the stone walls, screaming and crying. He felt the heat in the chamber rise until he felt as if he were burning.
You see, Mr. Talbot, you were not taken down as you have said and arrested for your crime,
the demon that was once the doctor told him.
You were shot and died of your injuries. Welcome to hell.
Epilogue. The butler did it.
Have you heard any good books lately? Audiobooks from Winslow Swan, now available on Spotify. If you'd like to support us, visit our merchandise store. T-shirts, caps, mugs, and so much more. Visit doorwaytonightmare.com today. Hey guys, this is Crimson.
And this is Swan. And we'd love to know what you think of the stories.
Even if it's bad.
So leave us a comment.
Or give us a thumbs up.
Thank you.